Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, brothers. This is Rhit Moore, past master and current secretary of Fort Worth 148.
Grant Gates, current junior warden with 148.
And Gabriel Jagush, master mason with Fort Worth Lodge 148.
Woo, we made it again. I didn't know if we were going to pull it together this week. All three of us have been so busy. School's starting for me. Gabe's got people moving in. Grant's just always busy. We made it.
I have this habit of biting off more than I can chew on the work end. I was actually told in a meeting that I need to learn the word no. So that's going to be my next lesson in my career is learning how to say no. We'll see how that turns out. I doubt it'll happen.
Yeah. So it was last night that we were like, oh, we need a subject matter to talk about. We've got a guest coming up to talk about social media. We're kind of ironing out details, but we decided to continue on with the what now.
Yeah, guys, I got to say, I really did enjoy the What Now series. And, you guys called it. I flipped that thing on about 2:15 as I was getting on to 20, or no, as I was getting on to 35, heading down to Corpus Christi. I kicked that thing on, and man, y'all had me riding until I was out of gas. It was good. I enjoyed it. It was a great podcast, gentlemen.
Sweet. Yeah, that one really has been popular, more so than our last few. So figure we keep it up.
Yep.
We got anything we need to get to before we get into that main subject, Gabe?
Yeah, I did have, it was kind of like, it was a question that was directed at me. This was actually my best friend's wife asked me this question. And this is not a question I'm going to answer here, but it's something that I'm going to kind of leave with the listeners to kind of meditate upon. She asked me, well, why aren't women allowed in Masonry? And I have an answer for that, right? I have an answer for that, and I'm not going to share it just yet because I feel like we do need to devote an entire episode to women being and not being in Masonry and the alternative forms of Masonry that exist. But I have an answer for that, and I gave it to her, but it wasn't very polished, and I kind of felt dissatisfied with it because she kind of caught me off guard. So, gentlemen, and I guess ladies in certain Grand Lodge systems, that is a tough question. The answer doesn't have to be tough, but just kind of meditate on what your answer is, whether you agree with women being in Masonry, or whether you agree that it should be only male, or if you are a woman who is a Mason or that considers herself a Mason, or whatever you want to phrase it. Have an answer for that. Work on it, because people sometimes are going to ask you tough questions. I think the even more important one would be, why aren't atheists allowed to be Masons? And so have a good answer for that one too. And I have an answer for that one, but man, I tell you, I was caught off guard. And I gave an answer, and it was all of the answer that I have, but the format and delivery was not good. So
got it a little out of order there.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying, man.
I was riding shotgun, and all of a sudden I heard that question. And I'm going, what? I was not expecting that. So, but it was a useful,
one of the tough ones.
It was a useful question to have asked of me, and I'm glad that she did ask it, because we need those tough questions.
We do, and it makes us better men to think about it and even come back later and talk with them about it. I know the atheist question is one that caused maybe a little disharmony with some folks that I am close with, as they felt that was unfair, and
I've got a good friend who talked to me about the idea of becoming a Mason, and I knew him I've known him for a long time. And I said, well, do you still not believe in God? And he said, no. And I said, well, then it's kind of a no-go. And he, he was very polite, but, you could tell that he didn't really take it well. And that's fair, but it's still kind of rough. So
it is fair to kind of take offense to it. And, unfortunately, mine came in a form of recommend me to be made a Mason. And it was like, well, we've had this talk before, and I care about you. How are you doing on your religious walk? Well, I don't believe in religion. Well, then I can't recommend you to be a Mason. Oh, and it got a little heated. So you have an answer ready for that one, because if you approach it, have an approach ready for that one. You don't even have to have an answer. Have the right approach ready for that one. That's one of those lessons that I learned. It's not necessarily the answer, because the answer is already there. You're not giving the answer. You're giving the delivery of the answer that is within the teachings of Masonry. So have one ready for that one. If it comes up, be ready for that.
Rock and roll. Well, so, that's kind of all I had for this week. So be prepared for the tough questions. And I guess in the subject of tough questions, I'm an Entered Apprentice. Now what?
What now?
Part two of our series of What Now. We're doing things kind of out of order, but I think, Rhit, you said based off of the response to the first one, it kind of made sense to do a follow-up.
That's exactly what spawned the idea. Was like, well, that one was well received, so why not do it for the other 2 degrees? So we'll hit EA up this week, and depending on if we have our guest next week or not, we'll do Fellowcraft next or the week following.
And we're actually doing it out of order on purpose, everybody. We planned this. This is a not a spur of the moment thing. Lots and lots of planning, hours of discussion went into the order in which we do these. But we're not going to reveal the reason why. That's for our listeners. Find out through their own introspection of the podcast.
There you go. It's a secret.
Good. I thought that was good. Was that good, guys? Did you like that?
It works.
Yeah. It works. Okay, cool. All right. All right, Rhit. Well, why don't you lead us off, man?
Well, I guess the first thing that you've got to define is, what is an Entered Apprentice? And, of course, I don't know that I'd ever looked it up in our monitor before, but lo and behold, it's in there. So if you ever have a question of what a word means Masonically, start with your glossary in your monitor. But the definition of an Entered Apprentice, here it is. Entered Apprentice, entered as a learner. It couldn't be a better description of what an Entered Apprentice is. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory anyways. You're an apprentice. You're there to learn something. This is a definition. You're entered as a learner. So get ready to learn. You go a step further, you're going to look at what's the duty of an EA. And, of course, you're going to have to look to your ritual. What does it explain? You look to your obligation, your charges, the lessons throughout, especially your working tools, which we'll go over here in a minute. But, I like to tell EAs real quickly that your job is to sit down, hush up, and learn. Which hush up may be harsh, because I certainly want them to feel comfortable to ask questions, but it's your learning time.
The way I like to describe it is to immerse yourself as deeply as you can go, which, for the EA, that's about, if we're talking about like a pool analogy, it's like coming up to your waist. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's not quite, you're not diving yet. And so immerse yourself, start getting used to the water, learn how things go. If you're in a lodge that meets if y'all stated meetings are open on the EA degree, go. It's not always going to be fun. Sometimes it's going to be boring as hell, but get a feel for it. just start kind of learning the mechanics of the lodge and learn as much as you can. You won't be able to learn everything that Masonry has to offer, but there is a lot to learn.
You got to lay that foundation.
Oh, absolutely. For me, whenever an EA asks, "Hey, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I here to learn?" I always tell them, guys, this is the time to learn a new language, because that's effectively what you're doing, not only in our esoteric work, but in your almost in your worldview. You're learning a new language. You're learning a new way to look at the world, and that's what a language is. It's a different way to describe things. It's a different syntax. It's a different order of thought. In some cases, especially if you're coming from English, your order of thought changes. So you're learning a new language, and it's something that takes time. I always encourage EAs to not be discouraged if you're there for a while, because you're learning a new language. That's the best way I can describe it.
No, and we're going to go over time frame as well here in a minute too, because that's something that I think causes problems in the proper initiatic process. So definitely take your time. And Gabe, you had mentioned stated meeting, and that's something I think is important, that if your lodge chooses not to open on the Entered Apprentice degree, that's the Worshipful Master's prerogative. There's nothing you can do about that. Other lodges will open their stated meetings on the Entered Apprentice, to where you could go visit a few others. But something it's done for our lodge, because they can't vote on any issue or anything, but they can start to learn the lay of the land and proper protocol. Because I know my first meeting, that wasn't the case. You had to be a Master Mason to go to stated. And my first 5 or 6 meetings, I just sat there just kind of learning, okay, how do you make a motion? How do you do this? What do you say when you stand up? So I just was like the quiet guy in the corner, and you get to work through all that as an Entered Apprentice in a Fellowcraft.
Oh, absolutely. And the open and closing of an Entered Apprentice lodge also kind of helps you with your memory work. You're hearing the language, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of good in having those, and maybe even if you don't want to open your stated in an Entered Apprentice and discuss business, have at least one meeting a month where you open in the Entered Apprentice, if nothing else, for the guys to hear it, see when the gavels land, and get an idea of how a meeting works.
You got it, because even as lax as it can get at times, there is a proper protocol to everything you do. I mean, from Robert's Rules of Orders, which we follow pretty closely, to, Masonic protocol of what you say when you stand up. All those things can seem intimidating at first, and they should. If there's proper reverence there, it should be intimidating and take you a second to get used to it. So,
Rhit, what exactly can an EA do? I mean, we know they can go to open EA meetings and visit, an open EA lodge, but what else can they do Masonically to stay involved, feel involved, and really kind of start melding into the lodge?
So I've got a list here, and I'll kind of read through it quick. But like the first thing, of course, is memory work, and we've got a section dedicated to that here in a moment. So I won't dive into that too deep. Same thing with degree work. Some lodges won't have EAs participate. Some don't know they can. You can. We're going to go over where you can, how you can. Of course, stated meeting, which we just talked about. I think it's important for EAs to go to those and participate in them. The main one I want to really hit on is visiting other lodges. And that's something that you need to, with your first thing, when you get with your instructor, they're going to start trying to jump right into the Q&A. And you need to ask them, hey, if I want to go visit a lodge, what's going to happen? What do I need to have? What pointers can you give me? And get that out of the way to where you can start as an Entered Apprentice visiting other lodges, because that's, to me, that's one of the best parts of Freemasonry. So you need to, step one is learn how to do that and do it. So, and of course, something else that a lot of lodges don't realize the EA should be doing is serving on committees. I think I've used the example before of brother we have in Lodge, who is an entered apprentice, and we're doing a golf tournament, and we had no idea he had ran 30 or 40 of them, and he piped up in the middle of a meeting and said, "Hey, here's the best way to go about it. I've ran 30 of them." All of a sudden, he's on the committee,
that was
as an
fun.
entered apprentice. And we were better off for it, for sure. And I think one of the biggest things, because I didn't get my monitor until I was a Master Mason. And if your lodge is not willing to give you a monitor, you need to be a big boy, go find it online, and don't read past the entered apprentice part. But read that, because we've talked about it before. There's stuff in that monitor that was before in the long version of the lecture, but it's not there anymore. So you're going to hear stuff about, brotherly love, relief, and truth. You're going to get the full definition of the 4 cardinal virtues, things you need to know as an entered apprentice, crucially need to know before you become a Fellowcraft. And without the monitor, you'd have no idea what was in there. So, if they don't feel comfortable giving you the whole monitor, maybe take out the back part, but hopefully they trust you and will give you one, and you can just read the entered apprentice part and study and learn it. So
don't ruin the surprise, guys.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you've waited this long, you can wait a little bit longer. It means a lot more if you do. But the thing about it is you got to dig into it, the entered apprentice part. And there's a lot they can do.
Oh, I wish it was something I had done as an entered apprentice. I don't think I asked for a monitor until I was a Fellowcraft. And someone had brought up the monitor in a stated meeting. And I went up to you and I said, "Hey, what is the monitor? How do I get one?" And you handed me one and you said, "Don't read ahead." Okay, I won't read ahead. But going through the EA part, I was like, wow, I missed so much. I was focused on the memory work. And I think I had visited one other lodge, but I'd focused so much on the memory. It kind of spoiled it a little bit for me. I didn't necessarily get everything I could have out of it at that stage. And going back as a master and looking through the stuff, it means something different now than I think it would have then. So I do think that's a good idea for guys to read that part of the monitor. And reading that part of the monitor also, I keep going back to this, probably stop, but it helps you learn the language. I mean, it helps you figure out how you're expected to think and act once you get to.
No, you're exactly right, to learn the language. Because, I mean, for instance, one of the biggest lessons of the EA is charity. And I know when I first received that lesson, I immediately thought charity as like Red Cross donating to, some food bank or something like that. But the definition in the back of the monitor, had I had it, was different, so it would have changed it. So there's a lot to learn in that language. There's no doubt. The monitor's crucial, I think, for an entered apprentice to have.
Yeah. So as a entered apprentice, how should you expect to be treated in the lodge?
So the reason I threw this whole question in is not that I see it as not that I've seen it as in a lodge as the complete environment, but I've seen EAs be treated as kind of like the pledge of a fraternity. And we're not your college fraternity, to where this guy's a pledge, the degree's over. Oh, the EAs will pick up the lodge. And you just walk out like, no big deal. While the EAs should pick up the lodge, they're doing it with you, and you teaching them where things go, or putting stuff out. You're teaching them where stuff goes. It's a learning process. So at no time should you feel like you are the college pledge, doing a bidding of someone. And I wanted to touch on that because I haven't seen it rampant, but I've seen to where some people kind of take on that attitude, to where you're not quite there yet, buddy. But guess what? After he takes that EA obligation, he's your brother. So you got to treat him on the level. He may not have gotten the lesson of the level yet, but you have. So you got to treat him on the level. And you should be.
Well, the other thing I've seen is when the lodge closes, EAs run out the door because they don't know what to do. And guys, don't run out the door because you have an opportunity to learn. Okay, this is where stuff goes. Why was this guy wearing? Why was the guy in the South wearing that jewel? Are there differences in the gavels? What's behind the differences in the gavels in this lodge?
That's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah, you miss that by running out of the lawn. And REAs are pretty good about sticking around, mainly because we're typically having too much fun anyways. That being said, I have been in lodges where, the EAs jet out of there and, the masters are picking up the lodge and they're missing those learning opportunities and they're missing time to start building some bond with the brothers there in the lodge. So, be ready to stick around a little bit. If you have time constraints or family constraints, that's understandable and you got to do what you got to do. But if you have an extra 15, 20 minutes, it's time well spent to be there.
No, and in the end, you should feel like a student. You're going to have to open yourself up to learn and to change and to do things that take you out of your comfort zone. But you shouldn't feel like the pledge. You should feel like, the professor's teaching you something.
So in the whole teaching process, what's appropriate for, let's say I'm an EA, what's appropriate for me to start asking?
This is one that comes from my own experience, because I joined and I was I wasn't the only treasure young guy, but I was one of the few young guys. And, the Sam Levacy generation just learned that word perfect. And I'm not for sure that they spent a lot of time dwelling on exactly what it means. And I take that back. I think that they did, but I don't know that they thought that was a part of what they should do at lodge. So, because Sam's an example of somebody who would contemplate that stuff at home, but when I'd go study with him, if I would ask him, why, what does that mean? I might get a brief explanation, but usually that's just the way it is, So the entered apprentice should always feel like they have the freedom to ask questions because it's appropriate to ask any question at any time. It is crucial just to kind of seek out that guy that's going to, rain that wisdom down on you.
I kind of feel guilty when I'm teaching memory work because sometimes we will get to the third sentence and I will start off on something way out in left field, see in the word. And then the next thing that we know, they're like, well, hey man, I had an hour and I just burned a whole hour talking about a little part that means a lot to me. I think there's some value in it, but so sometimes you're going to run into guys instructing like myself who I don't necessarily care if you're word perfect. I want you to be proficient and I want you to be good at it, but I want you to know what it means and have meaning in it to yourself. So you're going to run into two types of instructors. You're going to have word perfect guys, and you're going to have guys who want to talk about, something way, way out there. And that's kind of where I fall. So
every once in a while, Brian will just rip on me for being like, okay, that's weird. Stop talking.
Well, he calls me the squirrel in the silver shop because I am
squirrel in the silver shop.
Yeah, because if you sit down and learn work with me, and I've gotten better over the years to where I've gotten, I'll give a little tidbit to help you memorize it. But until you start getting it down as far as memory, we won't go too far into the meanings unless it helps you memorize it. But yeah, I'm horrible about running down rabbit holes with brothers. I mean, they just have to say, "Oh, that's what that means," and then it's like, wham! Here's a conversation for 10 minutes about.
Oh man, I did that. I did that to one of our EAs. What was it? It was last week. We were driving. I was driving, and he called. Anyways, we're doing some memory work, and we get to one part in the second section, and for me, there was a visual that pops up, and I was trying to explain the vision to him in my head from that part of the work, and I literally took like 40 minutes. And he was like, "Well, that's when he said, well, that's very interesting." I knew I'd lost him like 15 minutes before that. It's like, oh man, like I felt guilty about it because I knew his time was limited. And I hope he got something out of it, but I need to get better at that. And I tell you, Rhit, I think your dad is the worst about it though.
Oh, man. Hands down.
Oh man, he will dive down some rabbit holes.
Yeah, but I could sit and listen to Billy talk all day though. That's one of my problems though. I'll just be like, yes, actually tell me more, because I had no plans to talk about this when I walked into this room, but now that you started talking, I need to know more.
Tell me more.
It's like his conversational style. He just hooks you in, and then you're gone for.
Yeah, he'll suck you in. I was going to say, I think it's important that we pointed out both styles, and you should have an instructor of both styles if you're lucky enough to, because rote memorization. There's almost no point in that. The whole reason of these questions and answers is to learn the meanings behind them. The first question is the perfect example. Why do we ask that question, and what does that answer mean? There's some really deep meaning to it that will help you memorize it.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, I'm a very visual person, so the fact that it is not written was very difficult for me. I can sit down and read a book, and a year later, if we're talking about that book, I can be like, "Oh yeah, go to page 181. It's going to be in paragraph 3. That's what I want to talk about today." But conversationally, it's very difficult for me to learn just from hearing things, right? So, talking with guys who could help create a vision in my head really, really did help. Get me going, and some people learn like that. So, Rhit, you're right. You need to have both styles. And as an EA, you should know your learning style. We're adults. You should know how you learn best. Seek out the guy who teaches in a way that you learn. It's a very simple concept. If you're the kind of guy if you're Gabriel, and you have to hear it once, and you know it immediately for the rest of your life. I
don't know about just once.
Go find that guy who's going to perfect. And if you're more along my lines, where I have to draw a picture in my head if I'm trying to learn something verbally to remember it, man, go find Billy.
Yeah. There's no doubt. You got to find what works for you, and a little both doesn't hurt.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. Like it again, mentorship is just massively important. It's kind of what we closed out on last week. You can't do this by yourself.
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, because not only your instructor, but you do need a good mentor. It should be maybe one and the same, but 2 separate conversations, I should say. So the next thing that kind of I've heard a lot after an Entered Apprentice degree is they tell Entered Apprentices, don't go read anything online. Don't go Googling Masonry online, because you'll spoil it.
And realistically, we should be telling that to prospects too.
Well, and here's the thing about that is that I think, especially after you're an Entered Apprentice, it's easy to say, "Hey, look, here's the thing. When you go online and you start reading, here's what you want to look for, and here's what you want to skim away from. Because you don't want them to spoil anything, which it's out there on the internet, but you have to specifically be searching for it pretty much. To where if you Google basically as an entered apprentice, what is the gavel? What is the 24-inch gauge? You're going to get some great articles that could absolutely help him on his Masonic journey.
Yeah, but you also I feel like you do run the risk of finding things you shouldn't, though. And I mean,
no,
and it's
just
not
100%.
It's not you shouldn't. I just mean that a lot of time it's like when somebody runs by and spoils the ending of a book for you. You're not gonna lose anything in an inherent sense, but the storytelling becomes a little less fun for you, or receiving the storytelling.
No, and that's the thing, is because not only could you spoil the next degree or whatever for you, you could come across something that's totally false that you're like, whoa, what have I joined again? So they need to be coached, and that's where the mentor comes in as opposed to the instructor, to where the mentor is explicitly, telling him, hey, look, if you come across something that's the least bit questionable, I'm right here. Give me a phone call, shoot me a text. We'll have a conversation about it.
Well, and be ready to give them something to go chew on. If they ask for a book to read or an article to read or a website to go to, send them in a good direction.
Yeah.
That's a big part of being a mentor, is to keep them out of those traps in the first place. Because you can come across some. I'm going to search Masonic lessons in Google. Whew. That's a dangerous search, man. I mean,
no, you're right. You can coach them on how to do things. Because here's the thing. I mean, we're making a podcast specifically for entered apprentices and how to get the most out of it. And how are they going to find it if they're told not to go research?
Well,
Masonry?
They might not find it. We could be wasting our time, and we're still having fun.
No doubt. But, that's the thing, is that I don't think that they should be told to go Google anything they want, but I think they should be coached on how to utilize that resource and pull information in that's really going to help them, because there's wonderful blogs, there's great papers, there's good books, good podcasts, and none of these podcasts that are Masonically inclined are spoiling anything or giving anything away in a sense that it's going to cheapen it.
Yeah, I love pointing guys to, specific podcasts, that I've heard and I was, really kind of caught my attention. I mean, one comes to mind that I listened to today, the Roundtable, I think it was episode 176 on Albert Pike. Oh, it was great. Oh, that was great. That would be great for an apprentice, because you hear a lot about Albert Pike. And, if you're out there and you're listening and clearly you like podcasts, go listen to episode 176 on Roundtable. It's a good one.
That is a pretty good one. It's pretty in-depth about Pike. I listened to it 2 days ago as well.
Yeah.
Fascinating
really good.
Dude.
Really good.
Fascinating dude. I like what I like most about Pike is the story of redemption that follows his personal character arc. So, but he started off with some pretty intolerant views, and as his life progressed, really did a lot to try and make amends and repair damage that he'd done. So it was kind of interesting. But anyway, I'm diverging. See, tell me, Rhit, tell us about the working tools. Clearly, I need to use mine more, because if I'm, if I'm skipping off of the script all the time, maybe I need to make better use of that. What do you call that little hammer thing? What's that little hammer thing?
The little gavel.
Oh yeah,
the common gavel. No, and I want to
special gavel.
Give a moment just for the working tools, because Master Masons know all the working tools. And if you look at them, the Entered Apprentice working tools are for internal improvement. And then the rest of the working tools, you can see that you actually apply and actions into the world that they can see, you know. So when you're talking about an entered apprentice, you're talking about the 24-inch gauge and common gavel. 24-inch gauge teaches you how to maximize your time. And that's something that not necessarily everybody outside of you is going to notice. You know, if you're using your time properly, eventually people will recognize it. But at first, you know, it's something that you internalize and do. Same thing with the common gavel. It's used to divest our minds of vices, superfluities, and the things that shouldn't be there, those thoughts and actions. And again, it's an internal thing to where you can basically sit in a corner and be working your common gavel like nobody's business. To where when it comes to the rest of those tools, it's something you're actually out in the world doing.
I got to tell you, Rhett, that 24-inch gauge is the hardest thing for me. I in every EA I work with, I tell them it's my favorite working tool of all the degrees.
Yeah,
because it's the hardest one for me to master.
It absolutely, that is one of the toughest ones. But here's the thing is that in order to progress on, because while the Entered Apprentice has the longest catechisms to memorize, in my mind, it's the easiest degree to master compared to Fellowcraft and Master Masons. To me, the Fellowcraft is the unmasterable. I mean, you can't in a single lifetime learn all the teachings in it. And almost the same with the Masters. But the Entered Apprentice is a little easier to wrap your head around. And you've got to start out with mastering your time and divesting your mind of all those prejudices, superfluities, vices. Because if you don't, there's no way you're going to be able to progress in such a way that you're going to receive that further and more light. Because, I mean, we talked about it in the last stated meeting. In order to be a unit, you've got to meet people on the level. And you can't do that if you have prejudices, if you have biases. You just can't do that. Although you should be your own man, it should be easy for you, if you are conservative, to have a conversation and love your brother who is liberal. Just to use that as, since politics are so divisive.
Oh yeah,
because
sometimes we can't even escape it in our own lodges. But anyway,
no, you can't. But if you've divested your minds of those biases, you can. That's brother so and so. There he goes. God love him. You know, he's got to get that off his chest every once in a while. We can't seem to beat it out of him.
I mean, isn't that what the really big gavels are for?
Yeah, that's what the bigger gavel's for.
The mega gavel.
You got it. So if you can get in there as an Entered Apprentice and work all those out and get your time situated to where you can come at these degrees in order to master them, because it is an investment of time. Ultimately, is what it all boils down to, because it's an introspective event. You know, like we said in the last podcast, as much as I want to change Gabe, it's not going to happen.
There's a lot of change necessary there.
Oh, man. Is it my turn to get roasted?
Can we do another 20-minute rip on Gabe?
Yeah. Hey, guys, we're changing the podcast subject. Tonight is just a roast of me.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gabe. I'll stop.
We'll build you up here in a minute.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, all right. So we've touched on the catechism, and so why do we have to learn all this stuff? We got to memorize it. Why do we need to do that?
So I want to separate the two in between memorizing and learning, because for me, they're two different things in this example, because memorizing is important and people are like, there's so much. Why do we need to memorize this? But to put it in layman's terms, it's like doing bicep curls. You know, if you want bigger biceps and stronger arms, you're going to do curls and bench press. If you want a better, more efficient brain, you're going to memorize stuff. You're going to use your brain. You're going to do Sudoku. You're going to do crosswords, however you exercise your brain. And memorization is one of the best things to get your brain ready to soak in light. So to me, it's like doing bench press with your brain. And I tell that to all the entered apprentices or new guys that I learn. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're learning row, row, row your boat or a Led Zeppelin song. Memorization is memorization. It's using your brain. It's like learning a new instrument, and it starts creating more space in your brain to receive light. So while it's important that we learn or that we memorize the lessons, because it makes it easier to learn, learn the Q&A makes it easier, memorize the Q&A makes it easier to learn the lessons and apply it to your life. It also has the same effect as making that brain stronger. So when you're down in the dumps, think, oh my gosh, there's so much. Just remember, you may be benching 150 today, but it's going to be 240 when you get done with this Entered Apprentice degree.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And when you're working through your Entered Apprentice degree, and this is just how I see it, you got to remember that you are learning a new language, and you can't do it all in one day unless you're Gabriel Jagush. Then you can do it all in one day. Sitting. But that being said, like, just take your time. If you have questions, ask questions, and then figure out how to break it up in your mind. Because there's only one way to eat an elephant. It's one bite at a time, guys. So you can't expect to get it overnight, and you're building the foundation for the remainder of your Masonic career. Right here is your foundation. So you want to build it strong. You don't want to rush through it, and you don't want to try to make it a chore, because then masonry is going to be a chore to you.
You got it.
Yeah, you want to make it something where it feels I don't know, feels good when you get it down.
No, yeah, so that's a perfect example, because if you're looking at it as a chore, you're seeing being raised as a master mason as the end game, like all will be revealed at that moment. But it doesn't work that way.
If anything, there's more questions.
Yeah. So to take your time to really see this as an opportunity to learn more, because that's what you came here for. Mm-hmm. Make yourself a better man. And just memorizing stuff makes you a better man. But you happen to be memorizing very profound moral lessons on how to be a better person. So there should be some contemplation there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So kind of going with the gym analogy, right? When you first show up to the gym, you give it, you're not going to do a powerlifting routine, right? You're not going to go to the Olympics anytime soon if this is your first time in a gym. A lot of times memorizing stuff is really, really daunting. How do we start?
I mean, that's the real trick, is to just gas up the tank when you're looking at these 67 questions over 11,000 words, whatever it is. How am I going to get through this? And you've got to really sit down and gas the tank up and get ready for the long haul, because, like Grant said, you got to start just eating one bite at a time, going after this thing. And, something I did that really helped me is I Googled how to memorize things. And there's a lot of tricks out there. And I remember when I first read about building the building, to where you have floors and rooms to where you compartmentalize everything.
Oh, like the memory palace technique?
You got it. And
that's
I thought,
so cool.
Oh my gosh, that's so crazy. And you even hear because there's like the acronym for the Master Mason's obligation that's like a mile long.
Oh, yeah, I hate that thing. I feel like
Yeah,
the the acronym for the Master Mason's obligation, I feel, is almost more complicated than the obligation itself.
Honestly, someone tried to teach me that. We got like halfway through. I was like, "Stop! I will just memorize this.
Yeah,
Like, this is just going to make it work."
my instructor told me about that, and I was like, I'm never going to remember that. Like, I'm just going to go with the obligation.
Well,
itself.
it took me 7 or 8 years after I even had my ACERT to finally memorize the acronym. But here's the thing that I finally realized. When it comes to the room, because I build the buildings and put things in rooms and have room numbers and all that kind of stuff as well. And I think it was a podcast I listened to about synapses and connections to memories, to where your brain will create multiple paths to get you to the memory you're looking for. So if you've got one way to get there because you've just straight memorized it, you've got one connection that's going to get you to that memory. But if you connect it with an acronym, straight memorization, building a building, you've got all these memory techniques that get you to that memory. Now you've turned it into 4 different routes to get you there, and you're more likely to get to that memory that you want to pull up the next word you're going to say. Because I confer a lot of master's degrees, and there hasn't been one the last 20, 25 I've conferred that the acronym hasn't come into play for me. I'm Sam Smith and Harry Keaton did by, running it through my head super quick while I'm still finishing the last part of the obligation. It's like, okay, that's the next one. So you get multiple routes to that memory, and it seems like more work, but again, it's not necessarily about the memorization as it is improving your brain power, or the scale of your brain, the bench press power of it, and all of that just strengthens it more and more.
Yep. So like I said, the one danger you run into is that eventually your brain gets filled with all of this and like nothing else. So it becomes progressively, like, what I've discovered is, yes, you start to get better and better at this stuff, but like normal conversations with normal people are like a lot more difficult now.
Well, and let me give you just a cheesy example of how the memory work helped me. And this is cheesy, so you'll have to forgive me. But after I started memorizing all this stuff, things like I put stuff somewhere and I could never find it again. But it became easier and easier to recall those kind of memories. It's like, oh yeah, I put the key to that old tractor over here in this drawer. And while that may seem something small, it's profound, because when I read a book, I retain twice as much as I used to. Read a paper, or it's come to the point now to where I can recite the ritual work so well because of all these memory techniques that I can put my own flair on it. When the king's supposed to be angry, I'm going to put some anger into it. When he's supposed to be sympathetic, I'm going to have that empathetic voice, because I feel so comfortable with the fact that I'm going to know the next word that comes.
Absolutely. And that kind of works into our next question a little bit about, who can we study with? And my answer is study with as many well-informed brethren as you can, because everyone's going to have a different way to memorize. I memorized it a different way than Rhit did. Gabe memorized it by, osmosis and, some sort of magical Gabriel powers.
I would call that sheer stupid determination.
Oh, is that what it's called?
I don't know. That and boredom.
Is that what happened with your girlfriend? Stupid determination and boredom on her part? Oh, sorry, man.
No, she puts up with it. She's just like, hey, are you going to go recite weird ritual in your room again? And I'm like, yeah, girl. So
yeah.
One time I was reciting ritual I was in my parents' basement when I was visiting them, and I brought my little Royal Arch book with me, and she was like, I can hear you through the floor, right? And I was like, am I being that loud? And she was like, yeah, you're yelling ritual lines, and I'm like, oh well. I guess yelling.
Can't have no cowins.
Honestly though, some of the times, the ways that I practice ritual, if an outside eye had like a good view into that, they'd be like, this crazy guy is like yelling at himself in his garage, which is like how in the cooler months is how I prefer to practice the master's degree parts, is, like in the garage. And sometimes it involves yelling, and I'm just like, you know what? I probably look like a crazy person. So.
Don't worry about it, man. You definitely look like a crazy person.
Yeah, that's without any of this.
Don't worry, man. I've been called crazy 4 times by 4 different people today. So that's just in my professional life.
No, the reason I wanted to put this question up is because guys get initiated in their lodge and they think they can only study with guys in their lodge. And that's not the case. You know, all Texas lodges practice the same work. So that should encourage you to go visit on an EA floor school night or an EA study night. All of those kind of things is absolutely permissible for the EA to go do. Not only will you get a different version of how to learn things, but you're going to get that fellowship of visiting, which is magic in Masonry. You'll feel like you're you feel like you're at your home lodge. I don't care what lodge you go to. You're always welcomed. And it's a good experience. So you should absolutely broaden your scope when it comes to studying. While you may have your favorite that you is your go-to guy, don't be scared to go study with other folks.
Absolutely. Quick story. So when I was scheduled to get my EA, and I'm sitting there, and I go into lodge, and Sam Levacy is sitting there by himself, and we're supposed to be doing some work. And I went and I sat down with Sam, and I told him I was going to do my proficiency. And I asked him if I could study with him, and he kind of gave me that old Sam laugh, And I told him, I don't want you to let me get away with anything. I want to do it perfect at least once tonight. It took me about an hour and 20 minutes but learning it because I mainly studied with one brother. I mainly studied with Greg, and sitting down and learning it, someone else like that cemented it all in my head, and from there it was gravy.
Yeah, which is not to knock any one person, anymore. But it's like you need that exposure to multiple teachers.
Exactly, that additional exposure. I was getting good work. I was learning it right, but saying when you're thinking unacceptable. No, there's no ums in Masonry. There are no contractions in Masonry. Just those other little lessons. Getting with somebody else really can't help you as long as everyone you're working knows what they're talking about. And not every master is going to be a great teacher of work. It's just, that's how it is.
No, I mean, I'd worked with Sam forever, and he knows it perfect. But I had said something like "huned" with ED at the end, and then I went and worked with another guy. He's like, "No, there's no ED there." I had another instructor tell me when I would say "on," on this or that. He's like, you only say "on" 9 times in our catechisms. Yep. And he actually pointed it out to me. He's like, so if at any time you're at question, say "upon," and you're probably going to get it right. So you learn all these little tricks from different people and how they've memorized it, and they're invaluable.
Oh, they are. It's a game changer. Yep. So work with more than one person. That's the only thing I'm going to say, because and make sure the guys you're working with know what they're talking about, because you can get through efficiencies and not be perfect.
Yeah, just no doubt. No, and I think the next one I had where I put, if I'm Gabe 2.0 and I can eat up the catechism like candy, because you do get those guys. I've seen it numerous times. The guys that just come in and can just boom, they pick up the memory work as soon as you spit it out, they're returning it back. So where they're ready to turn in their proficiency in a month or two if they stay at that pace.
To bring myself down to earth a little bit, though, I would just like to let all of our listeners know that during our stated meeting with a couple of visitors on this past Monday, I pro-temmed the West, and I forgot what degree I was in. I had to ask the guys, I had to ask the pro-tem junior deacon, what's the next line?
I think that's an important point, though, because I learned my memory work from Sam, and he seemed like he never messed up. And 2 or 3 years after he had got me up to my A cert, he froze up in a degree, and I had to prompt him to get him started again. And it was such a I still remember it. I remember the degree, the moment, what I prompted him on, because it was such a pivotal moment. It's like, oh, we all mess up on these. It's okay. There's going to be goofs every now and again.
Yep, especially when you can't remember what degree you're in.
Yeah, but if you've got a guy that is just eating this up like candy, absolutely feed it to him as quick as he wants to learn it. But don't be scared to, he turns in his proficiency and tell him, hey, it's going to be a month and a half before we do your Fellowcraft, 2 months before we do your Fellowcraft, and let him have a little time to marinate. Because we get in such a hurry on these things that like the proficiency, turning in the questions and answers, is the mark for guys to progress. And I don't think that's the case.
Well, strictly speaking, yes, but yeah, it is, but it isn't. It's part of that finite playing field.
Proficient, but I am more likely to vote a guy to the next degree who has a deep understanding of it, but gets some words out of order, and than a guy who comes up and bam, 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 every word, but shows up disheveled and it doesn't know what it means, right? You run into guys who never learn what the work means. I kind of have more of an issue passing one of those guys on to a guy who struggles with the memory. That's just a personal thing.
No, it shouldn't be a personal opinion. That, to me, is kind of what has created the symptom of membership that we have, is that guys are passed and raised, and they really didn't understand what they went through. And it's no fault of their own. It's kind of a collective fault there that we didn't give them time, we didn't coach them properly, and really let them understand. Because if they don't know why our temples are situated due east and west, if they can just recite the memory work as their meaning, you need to give them a little more time to contemplate and ask questions.
Well, and I think it's okay to let a guy pass his proficiency and then teach him for a little while longer.
You got it.
Especially when it comes between the Fellowcraft to the master's degree. If you got a guy that can do his Fellowcraft proficiency, but clearly does not have an understanding of what you're doing with the craft, if he's, on Facebook talking about how he's about to achieve the Illuminati's greatest honor and crap like that, then, I don't know if I'd be okay passing him on. I think I have a problem with that,
And if I remember right, didn't you teach a few EAs, Gabe, while you were an EA?
Actually, yeah, that was kind of one of my main responsibilities as an EA, was teaching other EAs. And that was kind of an interesting sort of thing. And there were times when I felt like I would be teaching other EAs as an EA, and I would kind of get done with the whole thing, and I would feel like, is this appropriate? Am I overstepping myself? And most of the time I felt like I was okay, but sometimes I felt like I was being kind of arrogant, even though I don't think I was. It was just kind of one of this weird thing of like, I hadn't really earned, I felt like I had a sort of insecurity of like, well, I haven't gone on to the next step. Like, who am I to do this? But, and I feel like I did handle it respectfully the vast majority of the time. but there were still times when I was going, well, is this okay? So
all of those are perfect examples of a man getting better. I mean, you're talking about questioning your own self and how you do things, and you're going to come out the other end a better man. So to me, there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, I'll just say, Rhit, it was clear that Gabe was growing so much when he was doing that. You could just see, and you can attest to it. I'm sure you saw it too, man. I mean, we were watching Gabe grow while he was teaching other people. And really, I felt like we saw you gain new understanding of the work while you were teaching the work. It was really cool to watch you do it, man. Like, I kind of enjoyed watching you teach the EAs a little bit. I thought it was cool because you really did grow as a man. We could see it. I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody else, but I could see it.
It was a lot of fun. I can say that.
Yeah. And that's the whole point, is that while they may eat it up, doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, it's the same thing with the petition. I mean, you can fill out the petition and say, hey, I've done everything per Grand Lodge law that requires him to move to the next step. And legally, you are correct. Technically, you are correct. But is that the best thing for this brother? Is that the best thing for your lodge? Really question that. And when you can say, yes, it's the best time for him to move on, that's when he should. So don't be scared to let them learn that, turn in their proficiency, become proficient, and let them hang out for a minute.
Yeah. And so now proficiencies are pretty long. Can I break up my proficiency? There's 3 sections to the EA proficiency. Can I do 1, 2, and 3 separately?
You can. And a lot of lodges either don't know it or don't do it, because it is technically up to the lodge's prerogative or the worshipful master to where he can say, no, I'm not doing that. But legally, there is an option to where, as an entered apprentice, you can turn in section 1, section 2, then section 3, all at different times. And a lot of times at our lodge, guys will do section 1, then turn in 2 and 3 later. If they need a little booster like that, I think that's a great option. There's been times that we've told guys no, because they're that close and they just need to press on.
Yeah, and now I've also been, now this is not an opinion that I heard voiced in our lodge, but I was having a conversation with the past master of another lodge, and he, was very firm on the idea of the lodge determines proficiency. And that is very true. And he says, so if the lodge feels that you are proficiency after only hearing you turn in the first section, and they are confident that you know the second and third sections, then don't need to hear the second and third sections, which I disagree with quite a bit.
There's no disagreeing or agreeing with that. That's breaking Grand Lodge law.
Per the book, is that specifically illegal, or is that...
Yes.
Okay.
That goes with our next question about round robin, which I was not privy to until recently. And it specifically says in our law book that the candidate has to be asked every single question. So whether you know that he knows the other part and you don't want to hear it because it's so long, you don't have that option.
Yeah.
Or if you have 2 or 3 candidates and you want to sit down and just ask them every other question, you can't do that either.
Yep. Which is kind of a shame, because that's something you found that out via the decisions, right?
Actually, that was from one of my mentors, Sam Holden, to where he just happened to bring it up. And I was like, you can't do round robin style? And of course, I didn't give myself up, but I was like, I have seen that before at lodges. Not mentioning specifics. He's like, yeah, if you read Grand Lodge law, which I went back and pulled it up, and I'd read it before, but it says the candidate has to be asked every question.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those phrasing things, right? Where it's like, yeah, okay.
It shall be asked, not should be asked. Yes, you got it. It's one of those phrasing things to where He has to be asked every question. Now that gets into the lodge is the sole judge of their proficiency. So a good example that I like to use is, sometimes you get guys that eat it up and you hold them to a little bit higher standard. And sometimes you get guys that have got it, they got it. And they get nervous as heck when they're on stage in front of people and they just have trouble and you have to prompt them a little bit. But everybody in lodge knows they know it. You could necessarily deem them proficient, although they had to be prompted more than most.
Well, and that happens sometimes. And I've seen it happen. I've worked with a guy, had him just knock it out of the park, and then get in front for his proficiency and go dead. Just go blank. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens to the best of us. So.
Absolutely. I've had guys that speak different languages that just have trouble translating it and need a word every once in a while, but know it inside and out. But when the pressure comes on, which is part of it, but as they progress, that'll get easier and easier. So the lodge is the sole judge, but Grand Lodge law says every question has to be asked that candidate. So no cutting it short, no round robin. And, it got in earlier times when I was coming through, that was a very widespread practice to just cut it off after the obligation.
Wow.
Which is, of course, not by the book, but
you got it. You got it.
And that plays into as far as may come to my knowledge.
Yeah, but you don't see it nearly as much. I haven't been to a proficiency in years, a very long time, that I haven't seen done correctly. I've seen some sloppier than others, but that's up to their lodge. That's not up to me. I may think it's not a great proficiency, but if they do and they vote it that way, it's their prerogative.
Mm-hmm.
But there should be some standards there. You're not hurting anybody but that guy in your lodge. So you need to really think about what your standard is.
Yeah, which, if anything, that's the most important thing to consider. It's your lodge, will be okay, but that guy, you do hurt that guy.
So let me ask you this. Rhit and, have you, or Gabe, have you ever been to a proficiency where the candidate was not voted favorably? I never have. Even
never
guys
seen it.
have struggled and had to be prompted a little more, seeing a guy fail to pass.
I've never seen, participated, witnessed, whatever, a proficiency that was denied. I have heard some stories of people that were like, sorry for the phrasing. It just sounds super roundabout. I was talking with a brother who told me about the proficiency of somebody else that he was present at this. He was actually the one doing the examination. And based on the story that I was told, I was like, wow, like that guy's that guy's proficiency should not have been accepted. And he said, well, yeah, but it was what the lodge deemed was appropriate at the time. And that's fair. Lodge determines proficiency, but, I just remember, and I won't go into specifics, but, there are some guys that I've talked to that they've relayed some stories to me where I go, wow, okay, like, what?
I wonder...
So maybe people getting passed regardless is kind of what I'm saying. I
don't want to see it. Like, I don't want to see it happen to a guy, but I kind of want to see how that would work. So, I don't wish it upon anybody, but I kind of want to see how
it works. But here's the thing is that if a lodge brings a brother up that they don't know is proficient, they're being irresponsible. That's not right to do to the brother. The guys teaching him should say, okay, you're ready. And they should know he's ready. Not because it's the first time he said it right, because nerves will get the best of him. He has proficiently repeated it back to you a number of times to where when it comes time to get in the hot seat in front of Lodge, he's gonna spit it out and be okay with it. Because if you take him up there and he's not ready, how embarrassing,
I mean, we could always do something like from Kung Pao Enter the Fist, like we purposely changed him wrong as a joke, but that would be so mean.
No, I think it is important, though, that lodges realize that they are the sole judge and that there is gray area there depending on the candidate. And while I say they should have a standard, they should understand that standards could fluctuate in between members. It shouldn't hugely, but you're going to make certain concessions for certain members, because some guys memorize things better than others. But we shouldn't, there's a story I heard in the old days. Sam told me that they used to put 5 matchsticks out. And when you'd make a mistake, they'd break a matchstick. And after 5 mistakes, you were done. There was no vote. That was it. That was the vote. That if you ran out of matchsticks, your proficiency was over and you had to go back and learn it better.
That's pretty hardcore. I don't know if I could get behind that, honestly.
No.
And can you imagine how like ego destroy? Well, not ego destroying, but can you imagine how like self-confidence destroying that would be, like to hear the first match?
Oh goodness! And then you have 3 more break, and you've got 1 good one, and you're only through the obligation of the EA.
And you're at that point, I would just be like, "All right, you know what, guys? Peace out. I'm done here.
Exactly.
I'm done here. You guys can do your silly Mason thing. This is not me."
No, so absolutely. So you should know there should be a little bend there. But you have to be responsible.
I'm going to go join the Oddfellows.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Rhett. So some general EA stuff. Some of this I found interesting, and these are some questions we get quite often from new EAs, especially those in the Northeast corner. This is one I hear quite often. Can I wear Masonic jewelry? Can I put on the Mason?
And the answer is, that depends on your jurisdiction.
True that. And so let's talk Texas specific.
Yeah.
You can't put on the square and compass.
Yeah. And
now, we've had a Grand Master before that had EA pins.
Yes.
He used a lamp. It was a little lamp, like a genie lamp type thing. Okay. But take your pick. You want to wear Jacob's ladder? Get you a pin made up.
I think, and there are designs that I have thought of that would be very appropriate pins for Entered Apprentices to wear that would be recognizable to other Entered Apprentices, Fellowcrafts, and Masters as EA pins. I won't really discuss any of those here just because I'm not really sure if they're appropriate to discuss here, but there are some jurisdictions, for example, though, that permit you to wear the square and compasses in certain configurations. Now, I mean, those are online, right? You can find them if you like, but there are different configurations for the square and compasses in each of the 3 degrees. There are some jurisdictions that permit Entered Apprentices and Fellowcrafts to wear jewelry with the square and compasses as displayed in those degrees. However, I don't think Texas is one of those jurisdictions. I don't think we make a distinction between EA, Fellowcraft, and Masters compasses. So,
well, I mean, while we're doing the degrees, you can't wear the square and compass until you're Masters, no matter how it's set up. EA, Fellowcraft, or Master style.
Yeah.
Holy cow! There's like $500 Entered Apprentice rings.
Yeah, which is
on Google. Like someone would spend $500 for.
Now, my understanding, and this may be flawed, but my understanding is that often people will purchase EA degree rings or Fellowcraft degree rings in jurisdictions where it takes much longer to become a master than in the United States.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes a little more sense because I'm like, man.
So, for example,
that seems a little
for
much.
example, the UK and some parts of Scandinavia, and some of the Grand Lodge systems in France. It takes a lot longer to get to being a Master Mason, and that's probably fair. So, and one of our live listeners has asked, if the Grand Master gives you something, can you wear it? Generally speaking, yes, unless it has the square and compasses. So
yeah. No, and I think he was talking about where I mentioned it was past Grandmaster Donnie Broughton who had EA pins. He's the one that his year changed it to where Entered Apprentices come into stated meeting. So he was very EA oriented and had EA pins that he would give out. No Grandmaster's done it since, but there are things permissible. It just can't be the square and compass. So pick you out one. We used to have one with the point within a circle with the two lines on the side, and it was just a lapel pin. Yeah. And
I feel like that's a very nice, appropriate one.
Yeah. So there are things out there. While you're probably not going to find them online. You'd have to have them made. It'd be expensive. Those kind of things are permissible, but you're not going to get the square and compass. Well, but if you want to start shopping for your Masonic ring, I highly recommend that. There's nothing better to motivate you to get to the master's degree than that Masonic ring sitting in your drawer waiting on you to wear it. So start looking.
All right. So what parts can an EA play in a degree?
Here's the thing is that a lot of lodges don't even realize that EAs can play degrees or don't want them to play degrees. And that was a real game changer for us, is getting Entered Apprentices involved in our degrees. Most of the time they do very small parts, the coin presentation or maybe the Master of Ceremonies, which is very easy for a new EA to do because it's part of the questions and answers almost, really. They can do anything, though. So if you've got an EA that's chomping at the bit and blew through memory work and it happened too quick to progress them, teach them the senior deacon, teach them the senior warden. They can do anything but confer that degree. Grand Lodge law.
Bam.
Let them at it. I don't think we should discourage them from participating in a degree. And, I've heard every different reason why they shouldn't. They don't understand the full scope of Masonry or what we're trying to do.
And that's just so unfair, I think.
It is because, if you've got an Entered Apprentice that you can obviously tell that's not ready to work in the degree work, well, maybe you don't press it on them or, push them into that. But most of these guys, if they learn the catechisms that quick, they're going to understand the solemnity of the degree, and doing something like Master of Ceremonies or even Senior Warden, Senior Deacon is something that I think they can really handle.
Yeah, Senior Warden is a lot of fun, and then Senior Deacon's always great.
Yeah, jumping in the Junior Warden's chair, whatever. They've got pretty much free range aside from conferring that degree. And I say let them at it.
So for a regular stated meeting or something, or stated or called meeting, can an EA pro tem a chair?
So here's the catch on that. And that's why I made these two separate questions, because you open stated meeting in the Entered Apprentice, you've got no petitions, you've got nothing that's going to require the ballot box. EAs can pro tem any position except for the East. But if you have to vote on anything by that ballot box, Master Masons need to be in that chair. The Junior and Senior Warden. Because, of course, they can't pro tem the East, but if you're not balloting on anything with the ballot box, they can sit in the West or the South. And there's no problem with that if they know the work. But if you're voting on a petition or something that requires that ballot box, it's got to be Master Masons in those chairs. So a little caveat there. Otherwise, they can pro tem anything. They can be your secretary taking minutes that night if they're that kind of guy.
Oh man, who would ever want to do that? That sounds terrible. I can't imagine wanting to do that for more than a year. That just sounds like a beating.
It is.
Oh man, sorry, dude. I had to.
So how long are you usually going to be an Entered Apprentice?
So this question here was, because in our law book it says you've got a year to pass your proficiency, which we'll talk about here in a second. But once you're made an Entered Apprentice, you are an EA for life. There are no dues for an EA. There's no way you can become not suspended for non-payment of dues. The only thing that can happen to you is you can become expelled because you break a law, become a felon, or anything like that. But otherwise, you are an EA for life. You're a brother for life. You've been made an Entered Apprentice. There you are. No matter if you pass your year or whatever, you're going to be an Entered Apprentice. So,
what about that year, though? You mentioned a year.
Well, the thing that I really wanted to drive home, the first question is that don't get in a rush, because like I say, you are an EA for life. And in our Grand Lodge law, we have that year mark, which if you pass, there's some extra paperwork to do. So a lot of lodges are like, you've got to get it done in a year. You've got to get it done in a year. Well, you may not be ready in a year. In the old days, Entered Apprentices were that way for at least 7 years. So it may take you a little time to get up on it, but this is one of those things that are about as clear as mud in the law, to where a lot of people say after you pass that year, you're no longer allowed back in lodge or can do instruction, which is kind of the way it was. Well, it's the way it was in the old day. You had to repetition and it became null and void. But our laws have been amended. So if you go read Article 434A, it says that an Entered Apprentice, after he passes his year, can sit in lodge, can receive up to the degree. So he can sit in an EA lodge, he can receive instruction, he can sit in an open lodge to be examined to pass his proficiency, which is part of the process. So take my grandfather, for instance, was an Entered Apprentice for 28 years and came back to lodge, learned his work, turned in his proficiency, then turned in a petition for advancement. The lodge voted on it, which the lodge has the choice to do it by show of hands or request an investigation and then do it by ballot box. Either or, but that's it. Once you turn in that proficiency for advancement and it's voted on and approved, you're free to move on to your Fellowcraft. So it's not a big deal to pass that year. While it's a little more paperwork for the secretary, in the end, I know I don't mind doing it if you think you need more time. So it's not something that you should sweat, even if everybody in your lodge is telling you, oh my goodness, you can't pass that year. You can.
And so how long would you say EAs generally take?
On average, 6 to 8 months.
That sounds about right. I would say, yeah. Six is a good benchmarker. 6 to 8 months, like kind of. And we've seen people go as long as 2 years almost, but like you say, that's not a bad thing. But 8 months, I think, kind of on the longer end.
Yeah, I mean, we've got an EA now that's coming up on 3 years being an EA, but he's as active as ever. Every time we open an EA, he's pretty much there, steadily plugging away at his memory work. He's turned in the first section.
Yeah, and that sometimes it's the tortoise that wins the race. He's, as long as he's learning it and understanding it, then so be it.
You got it. This is an individual journey. So for me to say it should take you 6 to 8 months, it's crazy that everyone's going to fit in that box. On average, most do. Some get it done quicker. Some take longer. It's your journey. It's not mine. So Grand Lodge law gives us that leeway to where if you pass your year, you're still an EA and you can receive instruction and sit in lodge, do all the things an EA can do. But until you can progress, you've got to put in a petition for advancement. It's not that tough at all.
So what about the Masonic funerals? Can an EA receive a Masonic funeral?
That's a huge misconception too. Absolutely. They are entitled to a Masonic funeral. So that's something that you should breach at some point. Somebody should in your lodge with an entered apprentice is let them know that, hey, should something happen horrible, you have the right to be buried. Would you like to be? And most of all, let your family know those wishes, because we're going to ask them after you pass away. So hopefully no entered apprentices are passing away because they're, not that old. I hope not an old man in his dotage. But you never know. That's the cool thing about life. We don't know if we're going to live another 10 minutes or 100 years.
Yep. Well, how about the role of the EA in creating a more positive environment, a more productive environment? If you, as an EA, you see places where your lodge can improve, well, how do you suggest change or make change as an EA? Because sometimes I feel like, maybe you feel like you don't have that pull.
And here's the whole reason I put this question up is because a lot of lodges don't have the environment to where EAs feel comfortable saying, hey, do have y'all ever thought about doing this when a new candidate comes in? It's something I really would have enjoyed. I take for granted what we have because our EAs are so active and vocal, and I appreciate them for that because our lodge is better for it. But you've got to really take note. I mean, you're a grown man, obviously. Got to be at least 18 to be made a Mason. So you're a grown man, and you know how to breach a subject to where if these guys are, I don't want to say standoffish, but if they're not giving you the environment that you feel comfortable breaching that, come at it from a light angle. You're sitting around the dinner table, you hear them talking about so-and-so and new candidates or whatever, and you just pop up and say, hey, you ever thought about this idea? Definitely don't come at it from, if you guys would have done this, it would have been a lot better. Don't condemn. Share your ideas. See how they're received. Start with something small. Start with something easy and see how they're received. And if you don't get what you like, you've got to start really looking at it at the whole picture, whether you jive with this environment or not. But in the end, the EA should have a voice in your lodge because ultimately that's the future of your lodge. Like I said before, they're grown men. They know what's going on in the world. They very well may have input that's beneficial to your lodge. So you should listen to them.
Right on. So getting to kind of ritual, what about the obligation? Can a candidate be obligated for his Entered Apprentice, Fellowcraft, or Master's degree on a family volume of sacred law, whether it's the Bible or whatever he prefers?
And this is another one because I recently have seen a degree where a guy brought in his grandfather's Masonic Bible. Greg did it for his installation. So absolutely 100% you can bring in, if you've got a family Bible, whatever volume of sacred law it is, you can absolutely bring it in and have your obligation done on it. A Bible's a Bible, right? Volume of sacred law. It all works.
And honestly, if you have a chance to do that, dude, you should do it. That's so cool.
That's why I bring it up, because I would love to see more of that. How cool is that to take an obligation on your granddad's?
Cool. How stinking cool is that on Granddad's Masonic Bible? Golly. Anyways, so sorry, I'll get off my nerd train, but I think that's totally cool.
One of the cool things about asking a candidate if they do have a family book that they want to bring is that most Masons are used to using the Bible. If you need to be obligated on a book that is not the Bible, your lodge may or may not understand what is appropriate for you to be obligated on, right? They may have kind of an idea of like, well, let's say for a Jewish brother, well, I don't know, do we obligate him on the Torah or do we obligate him on the Tanakh or, what do we? And so that's kind of where, as a candidate, right? And then going forwards as a entered apprentice that will receive the Fellowcraft and master's degrees, we leave you with a lot of flexibility and responsibility in that, because sometimes lodges aren't going to understand what your beliefs might specifically, what may be more appropriate for your specific beliefs. So it's always nice to have a family book like that if you have that option.
Yeah, I mean, this is your ritual. You paid for it. So make it as special for you as you can. The lodge should be doing the same thing, trying to make it as special. But if you can add a little flair like that, more power to you. And Greg, he piped up. I didn't even know he's on here. This is great grandfather's Bible. So it's 3 times as cool.
Get it right, Rhit. Get it right.
Yeah. That's beyond awesome. Talking about echoing through the ethos now. That is, what a connection.
Yeah,
no
so the and see, now I've got it. I'm looking up the differences between Torah, Tanakh, Talmud, Midrash, and Mishnah, and a couple other things.
Actually, you guys got me off on Masonic rings, and I googled Entered Apprentice ring, and I've been on that for like 15, 20 minutes. So sorry. It tripped me out that people would spend that much money on an Entered Apprentice ring. Rhit brought up, might be an EA for 7 years in some jurisdictions. So that might make sense. But I was just like, holy cow, there's like a real market for this. This isn't just, we're just not spitballing here. People are doing this. So anyways, yeah.
So kind of touching on that idea of one of the reasons why it might be more appropriate for you to bring a family book is that, your lodge may not understand what's appropriate for you. Let's say your lodge doesn't just not understand what is appropriate for you, but they just don't understand you in general, and you don't click with them. Let's say you've made a mistake and you joined the wrong lodge. Is there such thing? And if so, what can you do?
No, and this is the one I wanted in, because it is kind of a downer. I mean, this is last-ditch effort. You should try to make your lodge work however it is. I mean, when I was first raised, I left my lodge for a year and it was like, I'm done. I'd visit a lot of other lodges and thought about joining others, but ultimately realized that if things are going to change at that lodge, and if brothers are going to come in the future, those brothers that will come in the future need somebody there to welcome them. And that could be you. So this absolutely should be a last-ditch effort. But if it comes down to that, to where you're like, I'm leaving or I'm done, you need to go switch lodges, because there are options. I mean, the simplest one is to just go to another lodge and learn the work, and then maybe go back to your home lodge and get degrees all the way up to a Master Mason, and then switch memberships as a master. That's easy done. But if you're like, nope, I'm done, you can also transfer your membership as an EA. It's a little more paperwork, takes a little more time, but once you find that lodge that you do fit with, talk to their secretary, they'll make it happen. Because there are those moments, worst case scenario, to where something happens and just rubs you absolutely the wrong way, and you shouldn't let it ruin your Masonic career, because we are an organization of humans. Things will happen that you disagree with. Hopefully you can work through them. But if it comes to one of those issues to where it's like, no, I promise you can find a lodge out there that aligns with how you think it should be. You may have to drive a little bit, but I know it's worth it. Ain't nobody living downtown anymore.
That's That's true. Most everybody that goes to the downtown temple is a commuter.
No, I commute. I have a lodge less than a mile from my house, full of great guys. But I fit in at 148. Like, I felt it. The first night I came, I felt it. And it was some secret sauce that the group of guys had. I just loved it.
Yep. And you got to find that. And that's the thing. Why I even hesitate to bring it up, but we've all heard it. Guys that just quit coming, or we've seen it, that they're just like, I'm done. And they didn't even realize there was the option to switch lodges. So while you should, like I said, be your last ditch effort, there are options out there. So don't get discouraged. Keep it up, because it's so worth it. I think that's all I got, boys, unless you got something to add to this.
That's all I got, I think, honestly.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Sorry I missed last week, gentlemen. But it's always good to be around you, spend a little extra time with you. Nice. And apparently a few people listen to us, Babylon, and hang out. So that's cool. Appreciate everyone who does that. We like sharing this with you.
Yep, absolutely. So, if you're an entered apprentice out there and you're getting discouraged, or you think it's a lot of work, you got to remember that nothing endeavored, nothing gained. So it may seem like a mountain of work, but look, I barely made it through high school. And somehow memorized all that stuff, so just find your motivation and get after it.
Yep. And so I guess this week's fraternal quote is very short and simple, but I like it, especially since we kind of touched on the idea of the working tools and how important they are. The true Mason always carries his working tools everywhere. And that's Brother President William Howard Taft.
Got it.
So, short, sweet, but, it makes sense. And that's the first thing that we have. It's one of the most important things that we can learn about being an EA is, we've got two tools. Got to start using them all the time, everywhere. We may not be we may not be great at using them, but, to always have them on hand, that's the important part.
No, there's only one way to get to Carnegie Hall, right? You got to practice.
Taxis?
Yes. Got to use them.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, it's been pretty good. I've enjoyed tonight.
Absolutely, gentlemen. Looking forward to Fellowcraft and beyond.
Guys, we'll look forward to next week. Talk to you then.
All righty, boys. This is Rhit Moore signing off.
Grant Gates signing off.
Gabriel Jagush signing off.